Maybe the deepest pain you've carried was never that other people moved ahead of you. Maybe it was sitting alone some ordinary evening, watching another year pass, wondering if your moment had quietly slipped away without you noticing. You looked at your own life and called those years wasted, called every closed door another piece of evidence that you had missed what you were meant for. Yet something inside you refused to disappear completely, even after everything. There was still a quiet part of you that kept whispering that your story held more than what your eyes could see. Chosen one, I need you to hear this before we go any further. What felt like the beginning of your failure may have been the final stretch of a much longer journey. Something tells me this message is reaching the people who are standing closer than they realize. And perhaps you are one of the few who are ready to hear it. Not because you have all the answers, but because your heart has already walked farther than you have given yourself credit for. People rarely give up when they first begin. They usually turn around when they are exhausted, when they have almost reached the place they prayed for, simply because no one showed them how close they had actually come. That is why this moment matters. It didn't arrive too early, and it didn't arrive too late. It found you at a point where one more honest step could change the way you see everything that came before. I also know something else about you. You've listened to promises before. You believed messages that lifted your hope for a night and left you carrying the same weight the next morning. So I don't want to ask for your trust without giving you something real first. By the time this part of the journey is over, I want you to leave with 3 things. A new understanding of why your efforts kept collapsing, the relief of realizing you were never starting from nothing, and something you can actually hold on to when the fog returns. Before we continue, think back to the last time you truly decided your life was going to change. Maybe you opened your laptop with fresh determination, filled pages with plans, or stayed awake believing this time would finally be different. For a brief moment, everything felt clear, almost effortless. Then, little by little, the clarity faded, familiar heaviness returned, and somewhere inside you began blaming yourself again, believing discipline was the thing you lacked. Very few people ever stop long enough to question that story. They assume the collapse says something about who they are, when in reality it may be pointing somewhere they have simply never been taught to look. We will come to that together, but not just yet. For now, stay with the quiet feeling rising in your chest as you consider another possibility. That perhaps you have never been broken in the way you believed. Notice what happens inside you when that thought settles. It feels almost like standing outside an old room where a thin line of light has been shining beneath the door for years without you realizing it. You don't have to force anything open today. Simply recognizing that the light exists is enough for this moment, because sometimes the first movement toward healing is allowing yourself to stop carrying a story that was never yours. You are not standing at the bottom of the mountain wondering whether to begin. You're much higher than you think, surrounded by a fog so dense it has hidden the distance you've already traveled. The climb did not fail you. The reason it feels unfinished is because the final stretch asks for something different than everything that brought you this far. And no one ever handed you a light for that part of the path. Before we take another step together, I want to ask something simple. In the comments, write these 2 words, "Still here." Write them for yourself, because there is quiet strength in naming where you stand instead of letting your doubts speak for you. Then stay with me, because what comes next is where understanding slowly begins to become something you can actually live. Let me tell you why I recognize something familiar in you. This isn't flattery, and it isn't about making you feel special. There are quiet signs that begin appearing when a chosen one has traveled through most of the journey without realizing it, and strangely enough, they look nothing like confidence. The first sign is a kind of tiredness that sleep never seems to reach. It is the feeling of carrying something invisible for so long that even your body begins asking when it will finally be allowed to rest. If you've ever sat in silence after a full night's sleep and still felt exhausted before the day even began, you know exactly what I mean. That weariness is not proof that you're falling apart. Sometimes it is the weight of a long climb asking to be acknowledged. The second sign is that the things which once distracted you have quietly lost their power. The habits that used to numb your heart no longer satisfy you, and the life that once seemed acceptable suddenly feels too small to stay inside. It can feel unsettling, but there are seasons when your soul simply refuses to settle for what no longer belongs to who you are becoming. The third sign arrives without warning. A moment while driving, a sentence that appears in your mind before disappearing again. A feeling that your life could move in an entirely different direction, only to vanish before you can explain it. Those moments may seem brief, yet they often feel strangely familiar, as though some forgotten part of you recognized home before your mind could catch up. The fourth sign is harder to describe. The timelines everyone else seems comfortable following no longer fit your heart. Advice that inspires other people leaves you strangely untouched, and you carry an impatience you cannot fully explain, because something inside you senses that your life is unfolding according to a deeper rhythm than the calendar hanging on your wall. Then there is the fifth sign, the one that may have brought you here. Despite every disappointment, despite every time you told yourself to stop hoping, some quiet part of you continued protecting the dream. You tried to bury it, you questioned it, you even laughed at yourself for still believing. Yet every time hope was pushed down, it somehow found its way back to the surface. Chosen one, that quiet persistence deserves more respect than you have ever given it. There is one final sign, and perhaps it speaks louder than all the others. Lately you have found it almost painful to watch people, including yourself, live beneath what they are capable of becoming. You feel that ache because something inside you has already begun recognizing possibility. Those who are still far away rarely notice it. Those who are close feel it every single day. So let me leave you with the truth that has been quietly unfolding beneath every word you've heard. Being one of the few does not mean becoming someone else. It means remembering someone you have slowly lost sight of. The next step has never been about earning more years, proving yourself through greater struggle, or climbing a different mountain. It is about recognizing that the doorway you have been searching for has been nearer than you imagined all along. If this message feels strangely familiar, don't rush past that feeling. Sometimes recognition arrives long before explanation does, and sometimes your heart understands what your mind is only beginning to catch up with. Stay close, because there is still one deeper layer waiting to unfold, and it may change the way you remember every step that brought you here tonight. Now I want to take you to the place beneath everything we've talked about so far, the place where so many of your unanswered questions have been quietly waiting. Because until you'll see this differently, you'll keep carrying a story that has never truly belonged to you. Every time a new beginning faded, every time your excitement slipped away after only a few days, you reached for the same explanation. You told yourself you lacked discipline, that you didn't want it enough, that something inside you simply wasn't built the way it should have been. Chosen one, I want to gently take that burden out of your hands for a moment. There is another way to understand what happened, and when you see it, something inside you begins to soften almost immediately. The tightness you've carried for so long starts to loosen, because the story changes from I failed to I misunderstood what was happening. That shift matters more than you realize. Most people believe the closer you get to transformation, the easier the path becomes. Yet life often feels exactly the opposite. The closer you come to the threshold, the more uncertain everything appears, as though a heavy fog has settled over the very place where clarity should have arrived. It isn't there to punish you. Sometimes the final stretch asks something different from the part of you that has spent years surviving. Think about it this way. Imagine two quiet rooms inside your own heart, separated by a door that slowly drifted closed over the years. One room became familiar. It learned how to work harder, think faster, solve problems, meet expectations, and keep going even when it was tired. The other room remained almost silent. It held the part of you that once trusted instinct, created without fear, noticed beauty without trying, and understood things before words ever arrived. When you were young, those two rooms were never separate. You didn't wake up wondering whether you were enough. You didn't measure every thought before letting it exist. You simply moved through the world with curiosity, and what came naturally never asked for permission. Then, little by little, life became louder. Expectations grew. Responsibilities multiplied. The voice that valued effort became stronger, while the quieter voice patiently waited behind a door that no one realized was slowly closing. From that moment on, you began asking one room to carry the weight of an entire life. You pushed harder each time inspiration faded. You worked longer every time your heart grew tired. You kept believing that more effort would eventually unlock what effort alone could never reach. That, chosen one, is what the fog has felt like all these years. Not the absence of desire, but the quiet distance between the parts of you that were always meant to walk together. Every unfinished dream, every journal left half-filled, every promise you whispered to yourself before falling silent again became another piece of evidence in a case you were unknowingly building against your own heart. Little by little, you stopped trusting yourself. It wasn't only the projects you abandoned that hurt. It was the growing belief that your own word could no longer be believed. That invisible loss has been far heavier than anyone around you ever realized. Take a slow breath and notice what happens if you release that accusation, even for a moment. Feel how different it is to imagine that you were never lacking character, only carrying a story that could never explain your experience. Shame begins to lose its footing when compassion finally enters the room. You have traveled remarkably far, while carrying far more than you ever admitted. And that deserves to be honored before anything else. The deepest cost was never the time you thought you had lost. It was the quiet habit of doubting yourself before you even began. It was opening your laptop only to close it again, deleting words before anyone could read them, convincing yourself that disappointment was inevitable, because it always had been. After enough repetitions, the hardest promise to keep became the one you made to yourself. Tonight, I want to ask you to reconsider that story. What if the record you've been reading from was incomplete from the very beginning? What if the conclusion you reached about yourself was built from moments that never told the whole truth? If that is possible, then possibility itself begins to return, because the answer has never been to become someone else. Sometimes the answer is simply allowing an old door to move again. If you have ever watched a child become completely absorbed in creating something, you've seen this without realizing it. There is no performance, no fear of getting it wrong, no endless negotiation with doubt. There is only presence, curiosity, breath. A quiet confidence that exists before the world begins asking for proof. Most of us remember that feeling only in fragments now, like sunlight slipping beneath a door we haven't opened in years. Perhaps that is why certain moments still stop you without warning. A song, a forgotten dream, a place you haven't visited in years. For an instant, something inside you feels strangely familiar, as though an older version of yourself quietly looked back at you. Those moments are not asking you to become a different person. They are inviting you to remember the one who has been waiting patiently beneath every layer you learned to wear. So let yourself imagine something with me. Picture an ordinary morning a few months from now. Nothing dramatic has happened overnight, yet before your feet even touch the floor, something feels lighter. The heaviness that once greeted you each morning has softened. You sit down before the task you've been avoiding, and instead of staring at another invisible wall, you notice a small opening. Ideas arrive gently. Words come without struggle. What once felt impossible now feels strangely familiar, as though your own life has finally begun speaking in a language you recognize again. Then a quiet thought crosses your mind, so simple it almost makes you smile. I remember this, not because you have become someone extraordinary overnight, but because you have begun finding your way back to someone you never truly lost. The longing you've carried all these years was never pointing toward a stranger waiting in your future. It was quietly leading you back toward yourself. When that pull towards something more rises inside you, don't be too quick to dismiss it. It isn't asking you to chase an impossible version of your life. More often, it is the memory of your own wholeness gently reaching for you through the fog. Chosen one, you are remembering far more than you are inventing. And this is what I hope stays with you after this moment. The distance between where you are and where your heart longs to be may not be measured by how much harder you can push. Sometimes it is measured by the courage to let an old door open one quiet inch at a time. That is why the 90% matters so much. You have already carried the weight of the climb. What remains is not another battle. It is allowing yourself to walk through a doorway that has been waiting for you all along. I can almost hear the question forming before you've even spoken it, and honestly I hope it does, because blind agreement was never what this moment asked of you. If you have spent years searching, trying, praying, reflecting, and picking yourself back up again, then of course part of you would hesitate. A heart that has been disappointed enough learns to protect itself, and that hesitation deserves compassion, not judgment. Maybe you're thinking, if this were really that simple, wouldn't I have found it by now? Maybe you sat quietly with your journal open, filled pages, searching for clarity, repeated affirmations until the words lost their meaning, breathed through countless mornings, hoping something inside would finally shift, only to find yourself returning to the same place. If those memories are rising now, they are not proof that you lack faith. They are the marks left behind by someone who has kept showing up, even when nothing seemed to stay. Chosen one, what you're carrying isn't weakness, it's scar tissue. Every attempt that seemed to lead nowhere left a quiet imprint, teaching part of you to expect disappointment before hope had a chance to breathe. So when your heart resists believing this moment could be different, it isn't trying to sabotage you. It's trying to protect you from another loss. The truth is, many of the things you tried were sincere. They helped you grow in ways you may not even recognize yet. But somewhere along the way, you began asking effort to create the very peace that effort was never meant to produce. You asked the part of yourself that knows how to push forward to also teach you how to surrender, and those are two very different languages. Think about the last time you told yourself to relax. The harder you tried, the more tense you became. The same thing happens inside the soul. Ease rarely arrives because it has been chased. It arrives when something deeper finally feels safe enough to open. That is why this final stretch has felt so confusing. You kept reaching with the same hand that carried you this far, never realizing another part of you had been quietly waiting to reach back. That is why so many sincere, disciplined, deeply committed people can stand so close to the life they long for and still feel separated from it by something they cannot explain. It isn't because they lack strength. If anything, they have spent years proving how much strength they possess. The missing piece has never been more determination. It has been a different kind of listening. Take a slow breath and let this settle. Every path that seemed to fail may have been revealing something entirely different than you believed. Those moments were never evidence that you were incapable. They were signs that you kept arriving at the same hidden doorway without yet recognizing where the handle was. There is a world of difference between being lost and standing in front of the right door without realizing it. There is another belief I want to gently place into the light because it has quietly shaped the way you've seen your own life. Somewhere along the journey, you started believing that if this were truly meant for you, it would have happened already. You called that humility. You called that humility. You called it realism. But beneath those words was a quieter fear that perhaps your time had simply passed. Listen carefully, because this matters. Feeling late is not the same as being late. There are seasons that can only be understood from the inside, and while you are living through them, they almost always look like a delay. Only later do they reveal themselves as preparation. The fog has a way of making long journeys feel like they have barely begun. There are moments in life when everything you've been carrying begins to gather into one place. The tiredness you've never been able to explain, the growing discomfort with a life that once seemed acceptable. Those flashes of knowing that arrive without warning. The dream that refuses to disappear no matter how many times you try to let it go. They stop feeling like separate experiences and begin sounding like different voices speaking the same truth. Chosen one, I believe you recognize that feeling because you are living inside it now. Something in you has been quietly rearranging itself for longer than your mind has understood. That is why this message feels strangely familiar. It isn't because someone else knows your life better than you do. It's because certain truths feel recognizable the moment your heart is ready to receive them. We spend so much of our lives measuring ourselves by ordinary clocks, by birthdays, by careers, by watching people we grew up with seem to arrive somewhere before we do. Those comparisons become heavy, and after enough years they begin to sound like truth. Yet there are seasons that refuse to obey that kind of timing. They arrive according to readiness, not comparison. Sometimes life offers moments that cannot be scheduled, only recognized. They come quietly, almost unnoticed at first, and everything depends on whether we are willing to meet them while they are here. That doesn't mean living in fear that an opportunity will disappear forever. It means honoring the moments when your heart feels unmistakably awake, instead of talking yourself back into old certainty simply because it feels familiar. If those quiet moments are ignored long enough, they don't disappear overnight. They slowly become harder to hear beneath the noise of habit, routine, and old stories. The dream grows quieter, not because it has abandoned you, but because you have become accustomed to doubting what once felt obvious. That is how many people mistake an open doorway for another wall standing in their way. I don't tell you this to create urgency born from fear. Fear has never carried anyone where love and truth were meant to lead them. I say it because I believe you deserve to recognize the season you're standing in. Something inside your life has already begun leaning in a new direction. And perhaps that quiet shift is the reason you've stayed with these words instead of walking away. There is one final turning point I hope you won't miss. It is easy to believe that understanding is the destination, that once you can explain your pain, you've already crossed beyond it. But understanding is only where the journey changes shape. Forgiving yourself matters. Seeing the doorway matters. Naming what has been hidden matters. Yet none of those things are the crossing itself. Deep down, some part of you has sensed pieces of this truth for years. That quiet knowing kept surviving beneath every disappointment, waiting patiently until your heart could receive it without turning away. We have only reached the place where the path becomes visible. The next step is where recognition slowly becomes reality, where the doorway is no longer something you understand from a distance, but something you finally have the courage to walk through. Before we go any deeper, I want you to mark this moment. In the comments, write these 3 words: the door opens. Don't write them as something you hope might happen someday. Write them as a quiet acknowledgement of where you believe you are standing today, because there is something powerful about giving a name to the place your heart has already reached. Those who dare to reach for the handle eventually discover what is on the other side. Those who only describe the door often spend years wondering what might have been. Write it. The door opens. And stay with me. What comes next is the part that changes this from an idea you admire into something you begin to recognize inside your own life. There has been one question quietly waiting beneath everything we've explored together, and perhaps you've been carrying it for years without ever finding words for it. Why is it that you can understand so much and still feel unable to move? Why have moments of clarity come and gone, leaving your life looking almost exactly the same? You have never lacked insight. If anything, you've probably understood yourself more deeply than most people around you. Yet understanding alone has never been the place where your life became different. The answer doesn't live only in thought. It lives somewhere quieter, somewhere many people stop listening, long before they realize they have. So for a moment, Let's set complicated language aside and simply speak heart to heart. Inside every person there are different ways of moving through life. One part of you knows how to organize, solve problems, carry responsibility, and keep going when things become difficult. Another part recognizes meaning before it can explain it. It notices patterns. It senses direction. It creates with surprising ease when it feels safe enough to speak. Life becomes most alive when those parts begin working together instead of pulling away from one another. When we are young, that connection often feels natural. We ask impossible questions without embarrassment. We dream before we calculate. We create before we criticize ourselves. Then little by little the world teaches us to trust only what can be measured, proven, or justified, and many people slowly grow distant from the quieter voice that once felt completely familiar. That quiet separation rarely announces itself. It happens across ordinary days, through responsibilities, through disappointment, through learning to silence what feels too sensitive, too imaginative, or too difficult to explain. Eventually you can become incredibly capable while still carrying the feeling that an important part of you has been waiting somewhere just beyond your reach. Perhaps that's why you've experienced those strange moments that seem to arrive without warning. A conversation that stirs something old inside you. A sunrise that leaves you unexpectedly emotional. A sentence in a book that feels as though it already belonged to your own heart. For just a moment, everything becomes clear, and then the feeling slips away before you can hold it. Chosen one, those moments matter more than you think. They remind you that the deepest part of you has never disappeared. It has simply been waiting patiently beneath years of noise, expectation, and survival. The longing you feel is not asking you to become someone new. It is inviting you back into relationship with the person you have quietly been missing. Even now, I have a feeling something inside you already recognizes pieces of this. Maybe you cannot explain it yet. Maybe your mind still has questions. That's all right. Some truths are first recognized by the heart before the mind knows how to describe them. But understanding is only the beginning. Knowing why you struggled is different from living differently. Recognizing the doorway is not the same as walking through it. Insight can comfort you for a night, but transformation asks for something deeper than explanation. And that brings me to what I have been waiting to tell you. Everything we've talked about until now has been about clarity, lifting the fog, easing the weight, remembering the parts of yourself you thought were gone. Those things matter, and they are beautiful. Yet they are still only part of the story. The deepest ache you've carried was never simply about unfinished dreams or untapped potential. It was about something even more personal. Somewhere along the way, you lost the feeling of hearing your own life clearly. The quiet inner knowing that once pointed you toward what felt deeply true became harder to recognize beneath the noise of fear, expectation, and endless effort. That is why this journey has always been about more than becoming more productive or more successful. It has been about recovering your own inner voice. The one that remembers what brings you alive. The one that quietly recognizes what is yours to nurture, what is yours to release, and what has been calling your name long before you knew how to listen. That is the place we are about to enter together. And for all those years, you carried the weight of feeling lost, as though it belonged to you. You watched other people move through life with what looked like certainty. And somewhere inside you quietly wondered why everyone else seemed to hear an answer that never reached you. That question has probably followed you into more ordinary moments than you realize. While driving home in silence, staring out a window after a long day, or sitting awake long after everyone else had gone to sleep. But what if your purpose never disappeared? What if the only thing that faded was your ability to hear it clearly beneath the noise, the pressure, and the endless expectation to keep pushing? Chosen one, there is a profound difference between losing your direction and losing your connection to the quiet place where direction has always lived. One is absence. The other is distance. Sit with that for a moment. Every season when you felt uncertain, every time you questioned whether your life mattered, Every moment you compared yourself to someone who seemed so sure of where they were going. Those experiences never proved that they had been given something you were denied. They simply reflected that your own inner voice had become harder to recognize beneath years of surviving. And when that connection begins to return, something much deeper changes than your ability to create or accomplish. You begin hearing yourself again. Not the fearful voice that measures, compares, and doubts, but the quieter one that has always known what feels true. That is the real crossing. It isn't about becoming more impressive. It's about coming back into relationship with the deepest part of who you have always been. Let yourself imagine what that might actually feel like. Picture an ordinary morning not too far from now. The alarm sounds, the room looks exactly the same, yet something inside you has shifted before the day even begins. The familiar heaviness no longer greets you first. Instead, there is a quiet sense of direction. Not loud, not dramatic, simply peaceful. Like finally recognizing a path you've walked past 100 times before. You sit down to your work, and instead of fighting yourself through every decision, you notice that your thoughts arrive with less resistance. You no longer feel like you're borrowing someone else's life or trying to become the version of yourself you think the world expects. What you create begins to carry something unmistakably yours, and even if no one can explain why it feels different, they sense the honesty in it. The people closest to you notice it too. Your conversations become less hurried. Your presence becomes steadier. You stop reaching for others because you hope they will fill an emptiness inside you, and instead you begin meeting them from a place that already feels whole. There is a gentleness in your eyes that wasn't there before, not because life became easier overnight, but because you are finally standing inside your own life instead of searching for it somewhere else. Then something beautiful happens. The dream you once folded away because it felt unrealistic, embarrassing, or simply too late begins to quietly rise again. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to shout. It simply stands up inside you as though it had been patiently waiting all along for you to remember it. Suddenly, what once felt impossible no longer feels distant. It feels familiar. That is what has been waiting on the other side of the door. Not a slightly improved version of the life you've been struggling to endure, but a life that feels deeply your own. The life that existed before fear became louder than trust, before exhaustion became your normal, before you began mistaking survival for identity. That is why I haven't wanted you to settle for understanding alone. You have understood enough already. You have analyzed your patterns, questioned yourself, searched for answers, and carried conversations in your own mind that no one else has ever heard. Understanding has never been your missing piece. Living from what you understand, that is where everything begins to change. Think about what that could mean for every relationship you've carried through these years. How many moments did you blame yourself for feeling distant when, in reality, you were simply exhausted from carrying a version of yourself that never felt completely whole? Sometimes the greatest separation between us and the people we love isn't caused by a lack of love at all. It's created by how far we've drifted from ourselves. When you begin returning to yourself, love changes too. You listen differently. You speak differently. You stop trying so hard to prove your worth because you no longer feel responsible for earning your place in every room you enter. People may never be able to explain what shifted, but they will feel the difference. They'll simply experience someone who has finally come home within themselves. And perhaps that's why the ache has never fully disappeared. If that longing still lives inside you, it isn't evidence that something is missing forever. It is evidence that something real is still calling. The quiet part of you never vanished. It waited, patiently, faithfully, like light slipping beneath a door that was closed but never locked. Before this part of the journey comes to a close, I don't want to leave you with another idea to think about. You've carried enough ideas to last a lifetime. I'd rather leave you with a feeling you can return to when life becomes noisy again. So wherever you are, allow your shoulders to soften. Let your hands rest exactly where they are. There is nothing you need to force, nothing you need to prove. nowhere else you need to be for this moment. Just notice your breathing as it naturally rises and falls. Now imagine that familiar door inside you, not as a symbol anymore, but as something quietly real. On one side is the part of you that has carried responsibility, effort, and survival for so many years. On the other side is the quieter part that has been waiting with remarkable patience. Between them is only a small space, and beneath the door you notice a thin line of warm light. That light has always been there. Every unexpected moment of hope, every unexplained sense that your life held something more, every dream that refused to disappear completely. That was the light reaching you through the smallest opening. It never stopped. You simply learned to doubt what you were feeling. Take another slow breath. As you exhale, imagine the door moving only an inch. You don't need to push it. You don't need to deserve it. Simply allow it to move with the same quiet ease that allows your breath to leave your body. Notice how the light grows a little wider, how warmth begins to spread into places that have felt tired for far too long. Stay with that feeling for another moment, then quietly say these words to yourself, not because you are trying to convince your mind, but because you are allowing your heart to remember them. I am not behind. I am not broken, chosen one. I am standing before a door that has always belonged to me, and it is beginning to open. Say it again, slowly enough that your body has time to believe what your mind has only begun to understand. Notice the difference between striving and allowing. Notice the small release in your chest, the gentle warmth that wasn't there a few moments ago. Hold on to that feeling, because it is more trustworthy than the old stories that have followed you for years. The fog may return from time to time. Old habits rarely disappear all at once, and familiar fears sometimes speak louder before they finally grow quiet. But now you know where to return. You know the feeling of that first inch of openness, that quiet warmth, that gentle shift inside, and every time you come back to it you remind yourself that the deepest part of you never forgot the way home. Whether you choose to carry this feeling forward in your own quiet way, or simply return to it whenever life feels heavy again, remember this above everything else. Something inside you moved tonight. It may have been small. It may have been almost impossible to explain. But it was real, and your heart knows the difference between a passing emotion and a genuine shift. That small movement matters far more than any promise you could make to yourself in a burst of emotion. You've made those promises before. You've declared that tomorrow would be different, only to wake up feeling as though the weight had returned unchanged. Lasting change rarely begins with dramatic decisions. More often, it begins with a feeling that settles deeply enough into your body that you carry it with you without even trying. Hold on to that feeling, the warmth in your chest, the quiet loosening you noticed, the sense that, for a brief moment, you stopped fighting yourself. Those moments become anchors. They remain long after words fade, and they have a way of gently leading you back to yourself whenever the fog begins to gather again, because it will return from time to time. Old doubts know the sound of your voice. Familiar stories have spent years convincing you that nothing ever truly changes, and they may whisper tomorrow that tonight was only a beautiful moment you imagined. They will tell you the light disappeared, that the door closed again, that you are exactly where you have always been. Don't be too quick to believe those old voices. A heart that has opened, even slightly, never returns to exactly the place it once was. The smallest honest shift has a quiet strength of its own. Growth is rarely announced with fireworks. More often, it arrives in tiny moments that refuse to disappear, slowly changing the way you see yourself until one day you realize you've been walking differently for a long time. Chosen one. This final part of the journey has never been about taking one heroic leap. It has always been about protecting the small, genuine movements that life creates within you. One remembered step becomes another. One quiet act of trust becomes a new way of living. Before you notice it, what once felt impossible begins feeling familiar. So before we leave this moment together, allow yourself to become completely still. There is nothing to solve right now, nothing left to prove, no standard you have to reach before you deserve peace. For just a few breaths, let yourself rest in the simple truth that you have carried enough for one lifetime. You have walked farther than most people will ever know. There were nights when no one saw you choosing hope again. There were mornings when simply getting out of bed required more courage than anyone around you could have imagined. You protected a small flame through seasons that should have extinguished it, and somehow, against every expectation, it continued to burn. Give yourself permission to recognize that strength, not the strength that pushes harder or pretends everything is fine, but the quieter strength that keeps showing up with an open heart even after disappointment. You have spent so many years measuring yourself by what you hadn't achieved that you rarely stopped to honor everything you survived. Now, if you're willing, lay down what was never meant to become your identity. Lay down the belief that you are behind everyone else. Lay down the years spent turning every setback into evidence against yourself. Lay down the quiet shame that followed unfinished beginnings. Lay down the exhausting habit of believing you always had to force your way into the life that was meant for you. Breathe slowly, and with every exhale, imagine that weight leaving your shoulders. Let the fog drift away like morning mist touched by the first light. It was never the truest thing about you. It was only something you walked through. It was never the place you were meant to remain. From that quieter place, listen carefully to what your own heart has been trying to tell you for years. I am not behind. I am arriving. I am not broken. I am becoming whole. I am becoming whole. I am returning to a door that has always belonged to me. I am the one who kept walking when giving up would have been easier. I am remembering the parts of myself that never truly disappeared. I am listening again. I am homeward bound. Let those words settle without forcing yourself to believe them all at once. Sometimes truth arrives gently. Sometimes it asks only that you stop arguing with the possibility that it has been waiting for you all along. Chosen one, if something inside you has quietly leaned forward throughout this message, honor that feeling while it is still warm. You don't need to have every answer tonight. You don't need to have every answer tonight. You don't need certainty before taking your next honest step. Simply refuse to let tomorrow's doubts erase what your heart recognized today. Remember this whenever the fog returns, because there may be days when it does. Return to the feeling of that first inch of openness. Return to the warmth that asked for nothing except your willingness to notice it. Return to the quiet place inside you that has always known there was more to your story than your fears were able to tell. You were never chosen because you had already mastered the journey. You were never the chosen one because you were flawless or fearless. You were the chosen one because, despite every reason to stop believing, something inside you kept walking toward the light. Carry that with you, guard it gently, return to it often, and let the final steps of your journey be guided, not by the fear that you've fallen behind, but by the quiet certainty that has been growing within you all along. You were never standing at the beginning, you were always closer than you knew. And perhaps, even now, you're finally beginning to recognize home.